What I'm about to tell you is something that happened to a friend of mine when he was a teenager. He swore it wasn't just a story or an illusion. I'm a 32-year-old man now, but this story is about one of the first paranormal experiences I had when I was 12 years old. I remember that my parents always hired nurses to take care of me and my younger sister, Yesna, who is a year younger than me because of their busy schedules. We stayed with the nurse until late at night when our parents returned home. It was the summer of 2004 when the young nurse who had been staying with us was about to leave our city, so my parents hired an old lady to care for us. My mother told us, "The nurse will start tomorrow. Be polite and listen to her." The next day, my parents left for work, saying that the new nurse would arrive at noon. At exactly 12 o'clock, she arrived, a tall, old lady with white hair tinged with henna. She had a thick upper body but thin legs that seemed unsteady and fragile. She moved very slowly. I remember being alone with her when she first arrived. She asked, "Aren't your parents here?" I told her no, they just told me you'd be coming at noon. She looked at the bookshelves, took a book, and put it in her bag. Then she went outside into the garden that surrounded our house. I watched her from the window as she stood in the middle of the garden, facing away from me, completely still. I was unnerved. This woman, who hadn't even asked my name yet, wasn't behaving like any adult I'd met before. I started to feel uneasy, even frightened, and wondered if she might be a witch, like in the stories I'd heard as a child. My fear intensified when she came back inside, smiled at me through the window, and waved. When I didn't respond, she let out a strange laugh, bent down to pick some grass, and then suddenly ran toward the house. Her unexpected speed frightened me so much that I felt like I might pass out. When she entered the house, she said, "I went to pick some vegetables." She laughed, revealing her broken teeth and black gums, which only made me feel more disgusted and afraid. She then went into the kitchen and asked, "What's your name?" I told her, "Yasser." She smiled and said, "I'll be back soon and we'll play lots of games." I tried to distract myself by playing on my PlayStation in my room, but I felt uneasy, sensing her presence. I glanced at the door and saw it was half open, with her sitting in the doorway, smiling at me. I was startled, but tried to focus on my game. She eventually left, but the whole encounter left me feeling deeply uncomfortable. Later, she grabbed my hand and said, "Get up, let's go." As she moved ahead of me, I noticed her shirt was pulled up and her pants had slipped down, exposing her hips. Unlike her aged face, her body looked unnervingly youthful. I awkwardly told her, "Auntie, your pants are falling down." She just laughed and said, "I know," then pulled them up, but her wrinkled black hands seemed out of place against her strangely youthful body. I wasn't at the age where I'd fully understand what was happening, but looking back, I realized now that her behavior was meant to disturb and provoke me. For hours, I felt sick to my stomach from the stress. Finally, she suggested we play a game in the garden. I was terrified, but she insisted, saying we'd play before having dinner. It was getting dark, and my fear grew as I thought about how my mom had left me alone with this woman. In the garden, she said, "You run, and I'll catch you." I laughed nervously, saying, "You're too old to run." She replied with a strange confidence, "Look, son, I have enough life in me to play, even without my legs." She then got down on all fours and told me to start running. I hesitated, not understanding what she meant. At first, she just sat there, smiling at me. I was about 100 meters away when I shouted, "Auntie, why aren't you playing?" And then, the most horrifying sight of my life unfolded. She began to run toward me on all fours, like an animal. Her movements were unnaturally fast, and within seconds, she was right in front of me. The fear overwhelmed me, and I fainted. When I regained consciousness, I was in my bed, and an old woman with a black scarf on her head was sitting beside me. She held a plastic bag with my father's t-shirt in it. She spoke in a man's voice, "I'm leaving." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, feeling weak and terrified. She then said, "Tell your mother she'll never see happiness again." Her voice changed, becoming more aggressive, as if she was speaking a different language. She became increasingly angry, pounding on the walls of my room. I cried out, "What are you saying, Auntie? Why are you scaring me?" Without answering, she turned away and stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity. She was so tall that her scarf hung down to her knees. Finally, she left the room, turning off the electricity as she went. I ran after her but found only darkness in the hallway. In tears and panic, I opened the door to find my parents standing there. I jumped into their arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I told them everything that had happened and asked why they had sent this woman. My mom looked confused and said, "The nurse was supposed to start tomorrow, not today. I called you and you said okay." I was shocked. "But I didn't even speak to you on the phone," I protested. My mom insisted. "You answered the call yourself, saying, 'Okay, Mom, I'm playing the station. Don't worry about me.'" Sensing the growing fear in the room, tried to reassure me. "Let's not worry. We'll check the yard, and everything will be fine." My dad said. As we opened the gate to the yard, the night air was thick with an eerie stillness. The garden, where the terrifying game had taken place, was silent. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the breeze, but it felt like the garden was holding its breath, waiting, but nothing seemed out of place. The garden was as it always had been, peaceful and quiet. My parents did their best to console me, telling me it must have been a bad dream, but I knew what I had experienced was real. The fear was too vivid, the details too sharp in my memory. For days after, I felt uneasy in the house. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound more ominous. My parents eventually contacted the real nurse who was supposed to start that day. She explained she had never called or arrived early. No one knew who that woman was or where she had come from. To this day, I can still see her twisted smile, hear her unnatural laughter, and feel the cold, suffocating presence that filled the room when she was near. It's a memory that haunts me, a nightmare that refuses to fade. The old woman never returned, but the fear she left behind stayed with me, a reminder that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. The experience left me with more questions than answers, and a lingering sense of unease that has never fully gone away.